She's a professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Purdue, where she also directs the Military Family Research Institute and Center for Families. She holds an MBA in management and a master's and PhD degrees in human development and family studies from Penn State. We won't hold that against her.
I didn't know.
They always beat us in volleyball, so. All right. Her research focuses on relationships between job conditions and family life, with special focus on military families, and has been supported by a variety of federal, state, and philanthropic organizations. She has served on federal advisory committees for the Department of Defense and the National Academy of Medicine, and has testified in the U.S. Congress regarding military and veterans' families. She was named an NCFR, which is National Council on Family Relations Fellow in 2005, and is a recipient of Work-Life Legacy Award from the Families and Work Institute, as well as been recognized for an outstanding career achievements that have had an impact on society. She received the Morrill Award, the university's highest faculty honor. So we are honored to have you, and thank you for sharing your years of experience with us today.
I'm actually going to come out a little closer to you.
Yeah.
And I know these cards are here, and I won't be offended at all if people want to work on cards while I'm talking, so feel free. If any of you had dessert at lunch, I'd be nodding off, so you can use a card if you want. I'm really happy to be here. It's not my first time at Kiwanis, but it's been quite a while. I come from a lifelong family of Rotarians, but that makes me even happier to be here. I'm sitting with my back to you. I'll stand over here this way. I also need to make sure that you all know that Gail Beck knows every word to every service hymn, including the Coasties. I'm very impressed. I certainly don't. So that was fun. So I was asked by Rodney. Rodney invited me too, and Rodney's not here. So hopefully that's not a vote of his confidence in me. But I'm happy to have a few minutes today to just mention to you a few things about the work that we've been doing. We sometimes, I think, are better known away from West Lafayette or around the world than we are here sometimes, and so I want to help correct that by just mentioning a few things about the work that we do. This screen isn't really large, so there are going to be some times that I'll show you some images and I'll describe what the image is to you. You don't have to stress that you can't read it or see it well enough, because I'll tell you what the bottom line is. So the Military Family Research Institute is right here in your own backyard. It was created in 1999. The funding was awarded, and we started operation in early 2000. I was part of the grant team that wrote the original grant, so I'm a co-founder, and I was co-director until 2007 when I became the director. And so for the last 20 years, we've been doing research about military and veteran families in the U.S., and when U.S. Military families are around the world. We've also tried to develop solutions and strategies and tools that can help military and veteran families deal with challenges related to their military service. We also try to educate communities about the enormous assets that veterans and military families bring to their communities. And I see a very large percentage of the people here have served. I thank you for your service. And you're demonstrating by the fact that you're here that you're an asset to your community. Too few communities think about that sometimes, so we're happy to tell them what we know about you. We try to advocate for policies, programs, and practices to be better in their work with military and veteran families. That doesn't mean that we lobby, but I'm happy to have occasions to try to point out to the Department of Defense or the VA when their policies appear to be somewhat out of step with what we know about families and their needs. And the most recent National Academies panel I served on made this point to the Department of Defense, that their policies typically for supporting families don't match very well the families they actually have. Families are more diverse than their policies accommodate. We work globally, as I said, but we have a special relationship with Indiana because much of our funding comes from Lilly Endowment, and so their interest was for us to use Indiana as a laboratory for the nation. So we try to develop and test ideas here that can be used in other states. And that really is what's happening. We have several programs that are in place in other states, which I'll tell you about in just a second. So we work very closely with the Indiana National Guard. Indiana is mostly an Army National Guard state, although we have 2 air wings, and we also have active duty folks who are stationed here, but we don't have any installations, as you know, where active duty folks are stationed here. You might also remember that the Adjutant General of Indiana was removed from office about 2 weeks ago, so there's a little bit of a leadership transition happening in Indiana. The strategic goals of our institute are to help both military and civilian communities do their work better for military and veteran families. We do research, of course, the policy work I told you about, and we try to promote learning. We try to help students learn about military and veteran people. A very small percentage of the population serves in the military today, so lots of students don't come from military families. Lots of members of Congress have never served. So we try to teach people what we can. I haven't served myself, but I've been studying for a really long time, so hopefully I can speak with a little bit of credibility about what military and veteran families have taught us. The ways that we do our work take all of the traditional scientific forms. We do articles and journals and that sort of thing, but we try to do lots of other things. So these books, in the top row we have 2 editions of a textbook that we wrote for undergraduates who are learning to enter helping professions so they can work more effectively with military-connected people. And then the blue book on the right at the top and the red books are all compilations of research by others. What we're trying to do is fill a bookshelf of compiled research so that when the next big conflict breaks out, I hope it doesn't, but if it does, people can find the research that they need to guide their actions. At the beginning of this conflict, no such bookshelf existed. In the years between 1970 and 2000, an average of 8 articles per year got published, scientific articles about military families. 8. In 30 years, 8 per year. Today, I'm happy to report we're up to about 75 a year, which is definitely better. And that hopefully will help us respond to some of the things that emerge. This is the most recent book that we did, and this one is intended for those of you who served. You know what after-action reports are. The Department of Defense doesn't do after-action reports or battle planning for supporting families. We think they should. So we convened organizations from all around the country and brought them together and had them write chapters and put it in a book. And I do know for a fact, one of my advisory council members tells me, this book is in the library in the Pentagon. So we hope this book is lots of places where people who will have the responsibility of responding to the downstream needs that happen when we send people into harm's way, that will have access to this book and will hopefully respond quicker, better, and more effectively than we were able to do during the conflict that we are still in, our nation's longest. As a scientist, I was taught to think about systems. I was taught to think about families as systems. So service members don't just get deployed and then they're all by themselves over there. They're part of families, and deployments and military service happen to the whole family. Similarly, military and veteran families, you all, are embedded in communities that are made up of systems. And many of the difficulties in our lives come from not being able to work effectively with systems, or the systems around us are not working well. The healthcare system is a great example. Isn't it frustrating? You go to one doctor, they send you to another doctor, the second doctor is asking you what the first doctor said, and you don't know how to answer the question because you don't know the lingo. And then they they redo all the tasks that you just already had, and then they send you down the road and you have to do the whole thing again. The system is cumbersome. As a client of that system, it's frustrating. But that's really true for all of us, but especially military and veteran families, because they not only have to deal with the military system and the VA system, then they have to deal with all the community systems, and people get lost between. It's hard to get from one to the other. And what we try to do is think about ways that we can link systems together a little better so that families don't have to struggle so much to get what they need. If we can make systems work better around families, then families don't have to work quite so hard to get what they need. And so I'm just going to quickly list a few of the things that we've done as examples, and then I'm going to tell you some things about veterans in Indiana. So our largest program is called STAR Behavioral Health. So what's it linking? It's linking therapists in communities, service members or veterans or their family members who need care, and helping to make sure that those counselors and psychologists and social workers know something about military service and are well prepared to talk with military people and to be supportive of them. I know many of you had served in the past, so perhaps you're no longer speaking in acronyms all the time. And we certainly do that a lot in academia. But it would be very easy for a person serving today to come and tell you a whole paragraph and you could make no sense of it at all. Making sure that you're well prepared to work with them, that you know what the kinds of things are that military service might produce in terms of people's symptoms, and knowing how to deal with those symptoms, that's the purpose here. STAR Behavioral Health now is in operation in 9 states. The National Guard Bureau has adopted it, and we're this year we're expanding throughout the Midwest and the Northeast. And if Congress is supportive of the National Guard Bureau's goals, then it will go nationwide. So that's kind of a fun ride to work on that. Reaching Rural Veterans links the emergency food system to veterans. In particular, veterans living in rural areas who are low resource. We think the VA spends a lot of time and energy trying to serve veterans, that's great, but they spend a lot of time focusing on people who are already their patients. They don't have so many programs that extend the front door of the VA to low resource people in rural areas, so that's what this is about. And it doesn't create a new program. All it does is help faith-based food pantries be better prepared and be aware of the low-resource veterans living in their area, so they can be welcoming and inclusive. The food pantry can provide food, bring services to the pantries so that veterans can get connected to those services, and then the faith community can help by reaching out a hand of friendship and reducing social isolation. Social isolation makes every other problem worse in life. So if you can reduce that a little bit, you'll increase their well-being. Measuring communities is another example where we're using our skills as scientists to go out and compile data about veterans and military people and package it up in a way that other people can use it, so that people in every city and town in the country can look up information about the military-connected people near them. This is publicly available. You can go look at it any place. And one of the things that we love about this is that it's a collective effort. And so the National Guard Bureau helps get us some data from the Department of Defense. Veterans Affairs contributes some data. Department of Agriculture contributes some data. And nonprofit partners contribute data because they gather information from veterans that they now are willing to share and make available to everybody. So the Wounded Warrior Project is going to give us data, but that helps everybody do their work better so that they actually know the characteristics of the folks in their area. For example, in this area, people have come to us and said, we want to work on unemployment. The veterans, the young veterans coming back, we want to help them. And we say, well, did you know that actually the unemployment rates are highest among people aged 55 to 64. It's not the young ones now where we're having trouble or where we see that they're worse off than their civilian counterparts. It's the somewhat older ones. So if you really want to do good work, Maybe you should focus there. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to help community organizations do, because they don't have the time or the money to do everything. They have to really think about where the needs are. Just this Monday, I was in Washington releasing the 2019 report from Measuring Communities, where we report out to the nation about how we think the veteran and military population is doing, where it's doing well, where it's in trouble, and things that people could be doing to try to address those needs. Now, if we come closer to home, what do we know about Indiana? Well, more than 1 in 10 people in the state is somehow connected to the military. It doesn't mean that they serve, but it might mean that a family member serves. That number is going to go down over time as we continue to lose World War II veterans. I travel to Washington a lot, and I don't think I'm ever there where there's not an honor flight landing. It's so wonderful to see those veterans getting a chance to see the memorial for their conflict. They live everywhere. Most of the time we don't know it because they're National Guard members and they're very scattered throughout the state, the folks who are currently serving. But they are there, and there's a lot of them. We've deployed, I believe the number is something like 15,000 people from this state to the current conflict. And these deployments were long and they came up suddenly. The Lafayette unit, for example, the Lafayette 209, at the beginning of the war, they left with 2 weeks' notice and were gone for 15 months. That's a pretty big shock to a family. And of course, at that time, there was no infrastructure built. This was the very early days of this conflict. So they made showers out of body bags. They slept under their trucks. They had no communication. They had no dorms. They had no, dining halls, that sort of thing. It was a tough deployment for them. You could probably tell me more than I can tell you about how military service brings good things and it brings challenges. For many people, it's a pathway to education. It's a pathway away from a family that might have had problems in the past. It's a way to see the world. It's a way to serve your country. But it also can produce challenges. This graph, you see a big red triangle. At the top, it means not very much risk, not a big problem. And at the bottom, that big fat part suggests, yeah, that would be a big challenge for families. So at the top is routine military service. Routine military service for many families is a good thing. You wouldn't expect that there'd be any negative problem, any negative outcomes for families as a result. But at the bottom is the death of a service member. And families who lose a service member during war will experience serious challenges. They may come through them just fine, but you know that any death in a family is painful and difficult and has very long-term consequences. And war just makes that harder because you may not have an opportunity to say goodbye, you may not get remains, you may not know where they were, you may not know what happened. And in between are all the other things like seeing traumatic things or someone being seriously wounded or injured. This war has been unusual. Every war is different, but what's been different here is that it's so wonderful. We have really great survival rates for wounds and injuries. And what it means is many people are surviving really serious injuries in order to come back with PTSD or other mental health issues. It's traumatic to get blown up. And thank God you survive. But then you have to deal with the trauma of being blown up. And so there are a significant number of folks who have been dealing with a variety of mental health issues. They call them invisible wounds. The invisible wounds, if this is the war of invisible wounds, both psychological injuries and also traumatic brain injuries, because so many of the injuries were blast related. We are seeing some signs that there may be for some kids some long-term negative consequences of their parents' wartime service and deployments. Again, I won't try to get you to read these bar charts because they're small, but what they show is that risky behavior in adolescence goes up a little bit with parents' wartime military service, and it goes up more if their parents have been deployed. And the 3 risky behaviors we're looking at here are ever having used alcohol, carrying a knife or gun to school, and thinking about suicide. And these are kids whose parents were deployed a while ago. So our next study with the National Institutes of Health is to look at the long-term consequences of parents, separation from parents during war, and what implications that has for kids down the road. But as I said, veterans are enormous assets to their communities. So you can see these data. They spend more time volunteering, they vote, they join community organizations, you're the evidence of that. They help out neighbors. You've all been trained, those of you who served, you were trained to serve. And you continue to serve. There's very good evidence of that. So you are tremendous assets to your community. And of course, many veterans use their education benefits and they get trained for advanced jobs. And that makes them even more important assets to the community. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the veteran community in Indiana. The data I'm showing you are not quite up to the minute, but I think the patterns will hold. I'm going to show you a series of slides, and each slide gives you a picture of one thing, and then at the end, I'm going to show you one slide that puts it all together. So again, don't stress if you can't see all the details. We do have a large population of veterans in our state, about 500,000 right now, and in many ways they're doing very well, but we do have some trouble spots, so I want to alert you to that. So this is consistent with our Measuring Communities effort. This is the kind of thing that I use these data to do. This graph shows the counties in which veterans are more likely to be poor than civilians. And normally that shouldn't happen because the kinds of benefits that veterans earn will typically make their poverty rates lower than among civilians. So here are counties in Indiana in the north and the south where poverty rates among veterans are higher than among civilians. Here are the counties where unemployment is higher among veterans than civilians. In most counties in the country, veterans are less likely to be unemployed than civilians, but there still are places where they're more likely to be unemployed. We have a lot of parts of the country where we have shortages of medical care. In the southwest part of the state, you have to drive 150 miles to find a child psychiatrist. That's mental health. This is medical care. But you can see our more rural counties lack providers. This is not a secret, but it certainly affects access to care. And it's true for both military folks and civilians. These are the mental health, behavioral health care shortage areas. Same thing, more rural counties. This is why telehealth is so important. These are the counties where we have above average percentages of veterans that are 50% or more disabled. Here's where we have, for some reason, it's very strange, this map, the below average percentage of veterans using VA services. And where are these veterans? They're near where the VA medical centers are. It seems quite strange. But there are a lot of, the VA is very quick to point out every time the newspaper says 20 veterans a day are committing suicide, what the VA says, 2/3 of those folks have not come to the VA for care. If you come to the VA for care, your chances of suicide are much lower. And my response is, well, then why aren't we working a lot harder to get them under your care? If I were them, I would say, well, we're having some difficulty serving the people who are under our care, so let's focus on that. But still, it's a concern. Between 2011 and 2015, these are the counties that had one or more veteran suicides. This is not a small local problem. This is a widely dispersed geographic problem. Suicide rates among the VA population have leveled off. They remain high in the military, even though the number of deployments has gone down quite a lot. So this puts the whole picture together. It adds up all the things that I just showed you and shows you how things concentrate. So what you can see is that the middle part of the state in the north is where we seem to have a confluence of challenges: poverty, healthcare shortages, disability, suicide, all of these things happening in general, pretty rural counties. And I showed these slides to state leaders, and they wanted to know, well, how did you come up with your numbers? And I explained. And so hopefully they can direct some resources to those areas to try to help out a little more. But you can see that a couple of those dark counties are pretty close to our county. And so that is an opportunity for you and Kiwanis clubs in the area, as you do work for veterans. There may be things that you can do to reduce isolation. There might be things that you can do to try to make sure that people can get to whatever care is available that they can access. There may be things that you can do to encourage employers to make sure that they're not seeing veterans as just somebody who might go postal or have PTSD and miss a lot of work, but they're an asset. They're somebody who has demonstrated that they can complete a difficult task, as someone who is committed to service, someone who can do a really good job. So, answers. How do we deal with some of these issues? Our persistent challenges are that it's hard to get the right thing to the right person at the right time. So if you ever have the opportunity to connect someone up, tell them about a resource, ask them about their troubles, you might be able to really be part of a solution. It won't be surprised to you to hear that I'm far more concerned about what happens between programs, how you get someone from one to the other, than what goes on inside. So anything you can do to be a caravan of support, a guide, a facilitator, that's a really important role, because you all know your community really well. And if you learn about a problem, you'll be able to know who would know more that you could connect them to. And I urge you to go ahead and do that. In our state, it's hard to sometimes deal with things that are far away from Indianapolis. And so being in Lafayette, it gives us a good opportunity to do some things for the northwest part of the state. And sometimes in community organizations and efforts, we spend too much time talking and not enough time acting. And so pushing for action is always a good thing to do. Here are some more specific suggestions. Inviting, and you've got lots of veterans here, I'm sure they were already leading your organization, maybe there are others. Those of you who haven't served, those of you who are in a position to influence community organizations, make sure you know a little bit about military service and what it might mean and what you might be able to expect. That's a way to be more welcoming. And ask people about their service. I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you what they've learned, what they've seen, how they felt about it. Suicide is an issue not just in the veteran community, it is for everyone. And all of us have the opportunity to make a good catch, to help somebody from taking that step toward taking their own life. There are trainings available. QPR training, is, you might see made reference to. It's sort of like CPR training for mental health. If you get an opportunity to do that, I encourage you to take advantage of it. Because again, that moment where someone makes the decision that the only way to solve what they're dealing with is to end their life, often just one person answering a phone call or reaching out can make that difference, and I encourage you to do it. Rural areas I already mentioned. Indiana leads the nation in its work in veteran treatment courts. Veterans who end up in the justice system for reasons that might be related to their military service. Veterans treatment courts modeled on drug courts are a great way to try to help them finish their process of reintegration and kind of get back on a constructive path. And Indiana's been doing really good work there. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We have a couple of minutes where I could take a couple of questions, but I thank you for your kind attention. Yeah.
I believe there's been more women, and I assume more mothers deployed in the last 10 or 15 years than ever previously. What impact has that had on the children?
So that's a really great question, and I've gotten that question a lot over the last 20 years. I don't think that, I think the reason that mothers' deployments might have a bigger impact on kids than fathers' deployments, and we don't know the data. We don't know very much about women who serve or mothers who serve in particular yet, because they're still a pretty small proportion. But our hunch is it's going to be worse for kids when mothers deploy than when dads deploy. And that might be right, but I think the reason it might be right is that mothers are typically the ones in most households who orchestrate the household. They're the ones who, make sure the kids get to school and monitor the doctor's appointments. And so when a mother goes, when the person who's orchestrating the household leaves, that has an enormous impact on the household. So my theory would be that if dad is the one who orchestrates the household, then it's going to be worse when dad gets deployed. If it's mom and she's the one, then it's going to be worse than when she gets deployed. Now, I'll also say, though, that deployment offers an amazing opportunity for dads and their kids when moms get deployed. Because what it does is puts dad in the primary parent chair, and it gives him and his children an opportunity to develop a kind of relationship that most dads don't get. Because for most dads, their parenting is filtered through their partners. Moms set the tone of what parenting is going to be like in the family. Mothers sometimes gatekeep access to the children, and it's mom's standard that sort of drives things. When mom's out of the picture, or when the primary parent is out of the picture, the secondary parent has to step up. And that gives them an opportunity to get to know their children in ways that they never would have gotten to know their children otherwise. And it also gives their children an opportunity to rely on that parent in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. I vividly remember when one of my sisters had her second child. They could no longer alternate as parents, right? Like they both were on deck all the time. And I remember she had a really tough conversation with her husband. Like, you are not a babysitter. You are not a supporting cast here. You are a parent. You made this kid. So learn what this kid needs. And many dads are. So I don't assume that it's automatically worse for moms to be deployed than dads. There are reasons to think it might be, but that'll be, I think, a big part of our study for these kids. Is it going to have been worse for them if it was their mom who went than their dad? Yes?
What happens when a single parent is called up?
Well, so this is another very interesting question. You are not permitted to join the U.S. military if you are a single parent.
Well, but you can become a single
No,
parent.
I understand that. And the rule used to be that if you became a single parent while you were serving, you would be asked to leave. Today, you are not asked to leave, but you are required to have a set of legal documents in place called a family care plan that explains what will happen to your children if you get called up, if you get activated and sent overseas. And these are verified. The military lawyers, look at them. Family care plans still fall through. This was an invention after the first Gulf War, when single parents got deployed and all of a sudden they had kids and no idea who was supposed to be caring for these kids. So these family care plans were put into place. There was a very publicized case in, maybe 8 years ago, of a mother who her mother was going to care for the kids, and at the last minute her mother said no, and a service member didn't show up for her deployment, and she was jailed. And of course, people didn't like this idea very much, but military folks were like, well, she said she would serve. She signed up. She made this commitment. She didn't show up. So it is controversial. Yes?
Have you noticed something that I noticed being I was a Vietnam vet, out of the military for a period of time and then back into the military when the all-volunteer Army started. At that point in time, the caliber of the personnel that were in there was outstanding. Not to say the others weren't, but it was just very easy to train those all-volunteer personnel simply because that their level of education, what have you, was higher and things was a lot easier. But my question to you is, have you noticed or have you followed along when they started to reduce the qualifications? In other words, we went from a level of here to a level almost at the education level of the draftees back in the time of Vietnam. It's what I saw, and I'm an ex-Army First Sergeant. So I've seen the caliber, I know what I'm talking about on this.
Yeah.
And so as your results, have you studied to watch as this caliber starts to degrade? They lower the standards, even to the point of allowing people that had been discharged from the military due to bad behavior, give them a general discharge,
Right.
and then turn around and allow them to come back in
Yeah.
if they've stayed out of jail for 6 months to a year.
So there's been quite a bit of experimenting over the last 20 years about, which requirements really need to be firm and which ones can vary. And I think the results have been mixed. They are having trouble meeting recruitment targets right now. It's tough in a good economy. And all of this talk of PTSD and suicide doesn't make people think that the military career is a really great thing for them. So it sort of backfires and makes it hard to serve. Yes, so there was a time where they actually allowed people with certain criminal behavior in their past to join in the last 20 years, and that did not work out beautifully. So I think they concluded that probably wasn't a great idea. But there are other cases where it's worked out really well. So for example, they have loosened up on some medical issues and psychological issues, and those folks actually performed as well or better as their peers. So when they have experimented with it, they've sort of tried to follow those folks and see actually what they do. New military entrants are still much more likely to have completed high school than the average member of the civilian population. And only about 30% of the people who ask to join the military are accepted. No, I sorry, I have that backwards. 30% are rejected. So about 70% who ask are accepted. The big concern, there was a report recently by a large group of retired admirals and generals, and the report was titled, "Too Fat to Fight." And what they reported was that only about 1/3 of young people in our country would even be eligible because of drug use, criminal behavior, or obesity. So then we have a real problem as a nation, right? We can't attract people to serve. They're not qualified to serve. We can't lower the standards too much. You can see where it could head, right? Particularly when we seem to be heading toward conflicts, all over the place. I see there are more questions. I'll stay up here and I'm happy to answer them, but I think we're at the end of your time and I don't want to make you late. So let me stop and thank you for your kind attention. It's been wonderful to be here today.